get into it. John chapter 21, beginning in verse 5. Now, if you know the history of John 21, Jesus had already risen from the dead. The disciples had already seen him. He had already appeared to them in the upper room. They already knew everything about the risen Lord, assumingly. But in John 21, and I picked this passage for a reason. John 21, beginning in verse 7. They said, then Jesus, well, I'm going to back up a minute. Then they said to each other, or they said to him, we are going with you. They were going to go fishing. Now keep in mind, when Jesus called them, what were they doing when he called them? They were fishing. They were fishermen by trade. It's really, really important. Because what did Jesus call them to do? Remember when he called them? If you want to be fishers of men, follow me. He's actually calling them to leave what they're doing and follow him. Now he's been crucified. They saw him. He's risen from the dead. And now he is gone. And what are they doing? We're going fishing. Going right back to what they did before they ever met Christ. Okay? But when the morning had come, Jesus stood on the shore, and yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. So that's the first thing I want to get. Sometimes Jesus comes to you in what you're doing, and you have no idea who it is. And sometimes we have this idea, if I'm really saved, if I'm really a believer, then every time Jesus shows up, I know exactly what's happening, I know exactly what's going on, and I'm always Billy, Bible, Susie, spiritual, right? I'm always that. And that's not how they were. When Jesus showed up, they did not know it was him. But Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? They answered, no. Now at this point I want to back up to John chapter 4. If you remember John chapter 4, they're on the road and he meets the woman at the well. And he sends them into the town to buy food. And they basically said to him, aren't you coming with us? And he said to them, I have meat to eat that you do not know about. See, sometimes we have this idea that if we don't do the work will not get done. Now, it's true that God uses us to do the work. But they were out fishing all night. He says, have you caught anything? And they said, no. And he said to them, cast a net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. Again, where were they? They were on the Sea of Galilee, probably dropped anchor so their boat was parallel to the shore. The left side will be out in the deep part of the ocean. The right side will be on the shallow side of the ocean. Now, I'm not a fisherman, but I'm smart enough to know that if you want to catch big fish, you don't cast on the shallow end of the boat. You go into the deep. Jesus says, I want you to go into the shallow end of the sea and you'll find some. So they cast the net, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved, he's not named, but we know from the previous, that's John. John said to Peter, it is the Lord. Time out. Sometimes people recognize who Jesus is faster than others. The idea that we all have the exact same spiritual journey just because we all trust the same Jesus, that's false. That is, if I could use this term, nuts. John recognized it was Jesus before Peter did. Now read on in verse 7. It is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment. And then the writer, John, specifically mentions because he had taken it off. Why did he mention that specifically? In our culture, that means nothing. He had taken it off. In that culture, first century Jerusalem, if you took off your outer garment, you were essentially naked. That's why the priests had to wear these leggings that covered their thigh. There was the teaching in that era was if you show your upper thigh, you're naked. He had taken off his outer garment. Peter was essentially naked. They had met the risen Lord. They knew Jesus. He came to them. They didn't know who it was. They had gone right back to what they were doing before he ever found them, and now we know that what they're doing was by no means a spiritual giant of a move. Peter was naked. Not everybody has the same spiritual journey. And that's what brings us to today. Not everybody has the same spiritual journey. So I just want to ask you guys some questions. I sent you guys in a Facebook message kind of what it's going to be. To be honest with you, I don't know exactly what it's going to be because sometimes you're going to answer. I'm going to have a follow-up question to that. So the first question would be, there are a lot of whether it's out here or people that I'm talking to today that have a really strong history of faith, a real strong, Brianna, you had Margaret, your dad was a pastor, obviously your mom's sitting right out here, but you had a very strong faith history. How do you think that impacted you as you raised your kids? Let me start with Karen. How did having a really strong faith background?
Because it's the right way to raise your kids. My dad was a strong man, and I was saved when I was 9 years old, and I can remember it very vividly. And we grew up going to church, and then when I was 14, my mom passed away. Mm. So if I hadn't had a strong relationship with Jesus Christ, I couldn't have gone through it, because I was a mama's girl. And so that's the way I wanted to raise my kids too.
So having a really strong faith connection impacted how you raised Lori and Mark and
Absolutely.
Melinda.
Absolutely.
Okay? Now, you now have grandkids and great-grandkids.
I do.
How do you think how your faith connection and how you raise your kids, how do you think that impacts them as they raise their kids?
Because they're raising their kids in the same direction. Strong mothers, strong children.
Question, no. Do all of them have the same does everyone have the same relationship with Jesus that you did?
Yes, they do.
But does everyone respond the same way you did?
No, not everybody responds the same, but they all have a strong faith.
John 21, all the disciples in the same boat, but not everyone responded the same way to the same Jesus at the same time. Brianna, Margaret was a great example. Probably one of my favorite people in the world, just to be honest with you. How does that, you have small kids at home, right? How does that, having a great heritage like that, how does that impact how you now raise your kids?
Well, here we are, same church. Asher's wanting to be baptized already, and he just turned 9 years old. Some of the Sundays that I don't want to be here, he's always like, let's go to church, So.
Good boy.
Yeah. Yeah. But, gosh, I don't know.
I'll piggyback off that just a little bit. I think that consistency of just the expectation of coming, it's really important to be around people that are like-minded and that you get that refresher. And I think every week when I come, that you see my mom, you should be in church each Sunday, but that ebbs and flows throughout your life as things do. But I think that importance that's instilled it changes, the importance of it changes for you. You know, initially as a kid, it's just a routine, maybe. There are weeks when I think, the kids would say something when we get home and I think, oh my gosh, like that's what you picked up. Sometimes it's not always the best thing, but like, it's amazing that they're listening, you know, they're here, they're soaking it in, whether that's in Sunday school and that kind of thing. And I think that happened with me as well as a kid, that you soak it in. And each week may not be a message for you exactly, but maybe that's a message for someone else. And so that consistency of being here every week and getting that message and having that opportunity is really important.
Okay. Let me turn my attention now to Laura and Teresa for this purpose. Not everyone has a great spiritual legacy going back a long time. Laura's mom, and I won't go into a lot of the detail, but Laura's mom was just not a great spiritual icon. Now, when she was 15, 16, she actually came to live with my mom and dad. She got the good mom and dad. I was already in the military at the time. But before that, and Teresa, again, I'm not going to say not a believing family, but not a great spiritual icon family. How did that impact, not necessarily, we talked about how the good impacts how you raise your kids. How does the bad say, I don't want to raise my kids that way? Laura, how does that impact you? How does their not great example say, I don't want to leave that example for my kids?
Well, so like Jim said, I did not have a spiritual heritage. I was not raised in a Christian home. My mom was married 7 different times, and my sister and I were born to people that she was not married to. I feel like I am the definition of dysfunction. My mom was abusive. She had addictive personalities. It was rough. And like Jim said, at 15 years old, my mom, she dropped me off at work. I had a permit to work. And she dropped me off at Burger King, and when it was time to come home, she had left to go live with another guy with my sister. And my sister was 6 years younger than me. And I didn't know how I was going to get home. There was no money, there was nothing. So that family let me stay there for a few days, and then the daughter of the family and I liked the same boy, so we had a fight. So I walked in the rain to the youth pastor's house, and I showed up on their doorstep and told them I didn't have anywhere to go. So they let me in. I'm trying to make this brief because I have such a long story. But anyways, they let me in. They became my first set of foster parents. Later on, I made some poor choices as a teenager, and they felt like there wasn't enough of an age gap to parent me appropriately. So then they sent me to Jim's family, who were also foster parents. And I was terrified of his mother. She was a little scary.
Rightly so.
Yeah, yeah. And so anyways, I went there. Long story short, stop it. So long story short, I tell people I married my brother, and that's what's wrong with our children. Moving forward, I did not know how to be a mom. So I feel really bad for my son because I just wasn't a good mom when he was little. But I came to know the Lord when we were in Germany after Brennan was born. I accepted Christ as my Savior. And then I knew I wanted to have a different relationship with my children than I had with my mom. So the way I did that was through faith community. It was through Bible study with other women, learning how to parent. I learned so much. Teresa is one of the women that was in Bible study with me for years. I learned so much from Teresa. And prayer. And those 3 things are what transformed my life. And I credit a lot of the women in this church who mentored me, the fact that I have a good relationship with each of my children.
So let me piggyback on that to springboard over to Teresa, because she mentioned that,
After she made me cry.
because she said you're actually one of the people who inspired her to have a good relationship with her kids. And yet that, so can you talk a little bit about how, because that's not the, I'm not gonna say the heritage, but that's not really how you grew up. So how did you cultivate that type of relationship? I mean, all your kids are here, right?
Except Kirsten, who lives in
Oh,
Colorado.
But Kirsten lives in Colorado. It's a long way to commute.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So, but all your kids are here that are able to be here. And that's a great testimony to you. So how did you make that transition from I didn't have a great to now I want to be great?
So I was confirmed. I mean, I had a grandma who went to the South Marion Church. And so I had a little bit of Christianity there, but I wasn't born again. I didn't really know what that meant, but I was confirmed. And so then I think the turning point for me was when I started having children. And I had Ashley. I thought, I can't do this on my own. I needed God. So that was and then we had a pastor, I think it was, what's his name? Welander, Paul Welander. I remember he was, he had a lot of issues, but he was a mentor in my new Christian walk, and that was helpful. And from there on, it's just like, I don't know why I'm crying.
Yeah, look what you did after. Wait.
It's,
Okay, never mind.
because it really, it was exciting. It was exciting. The Christian walk was exciting. Your kids, they disappoint you at times, but you have your faith and you get through it.
And again, it's a great testimony to everybody here. That I know Madeline is here, Shaylee's in church in Waukee, Brendan's in Chicago flying, so can't be in church in the air. But it's a great testimony. But I want to, again, shift gears. I want to talk to Amanda for a minute. Young kids at home, grandkids, great-grandkids, but what's it like to have teenagers at home? How do you translate your faith? Because I know being a teacher also, it adds a little bit of a dynamic about, I don't know the right way to say it, but how do you maintain the balance? I want you to be really good. What are you laughing at? I want you to be really good, good Christian kids, but at the same time, how do you balance being a normal, everyday teenager and yet passing on really active faith?
I think, at a certain age, kids make their own choices in some regard. So I always say, we just kind of got lucky sometimes, but it's not over yet. So the part of that too, though, with that luck, it extends beyond our home. We've been fortunate that the kids have friends that are strong in their faith, and I think providing opportunities. I was thinking about how I grew up too, like going to camp. It's so, and those kinds of things that are just so important to see that there's so many other kids out there that are really strong in their faith, and then the kids having a chance to have friends that are strong in their faith as well. That can be really influential on them at this age. So I think just having opportunities, I felt so strongly about the CIA program that we have here, that the kids have opportunities to learn about if they're in a Christ-centered family or not. They have opportunities to learn about that, and then also that we've been fortunate to have that influence in addition to, of course, my parents and that kind of thing, and Chris's parents too. So.
And so I want to kind of, Karen has adult kids. Yep. And grandkids. And great-grandkids. Yep. Read in the story here that a lot of times when they came to Jesus and they saw the risen Lord, they had that relationship with him, they knew he had risen from the dead, they knew all these things, and yet knowing all these things, they kind of went back to what they did before. Now, Jesus never says, hey, you unsaved people. He loved them. He served them. He says, I want you to do this. He trusted them, even though they did not display good faith. You know, Jesus comes to us whether we have great faith or not. Speak a little bit about how do you handle things as a mom when you can see that your kids are now, like the disciples, going right back to what they did before, and you want to say, well, you want to slap them upside the head and say, you know better,
Yeah.
but you don't. How do you handle it?
Well, everybody makes mistakes in their life. Even I've made a couple.
I don't believe it.
Is that true? Okay. I'm just, okay.
But Jesus forgives us of our mistakes if we ask him to forgive us. And then we go on in fellowship with him. But everybody's set of opportunities is not alike. And people do have moments when they do things they wish they'd never done. God forgives you of those mistakes, but you have to live with the consequences.
That's right.
And even in the consequences, the Lord will bless you.
Amen.
We've got a lot of consequences that are a real blessing to us.
So, that's actually a very good segue into one of the questions I had. One of the phrases that my wife and I use a lot is choices are free, consequences are not.
That is correct.
So, kind of the choices, how do you maintain that distance between I can't choose for you. I can
No.
tell you what I want you to do, but I can't choose for you.
My life verse is be still and know that I am God. And that's what I always cling to. I say the prayers, I offer maybe solutions, but it's up to them and God what they do.
I will say that it's very hard for me when my adult children are making choices that I don't agree with. And what I try really hard to do is, I'm learning, I'm still learning, yes, Maddie, I'm learning. I don't have to necessarily agree with them, but I do have a responsibility to try to understand their perspective and where they're coming from. I'm finding it hard to parent adult children in the culture we live in today
Yeah.
because I don't see a lot of biblical foundation in the society we're living in. And so the influence that they're experiencing is greater outside of God's word than inside.
It's true.
It's been very challenging. So, a couple things. A lady in our church in Knoxville, a sweet lady named Rena Bell Adams, told me once, she said, Laura, when you can't do anything else, you can always show love.
Yeah.
So that's something I've tried to hold on to. I kind of hate that Maddie's sitting here right now because just last Sunday, I totally had a very poor response to a conversation we were having.
Meltdown.
And so when that happens, a couple other things, I've learned how to say when I'm wrong, to own it, to ask forgiveness, and then I'm still learning how to not beat myself up over it.
Yeah.
So those are just a couple things with.
So young kids at home, Rena, choices are free, consequences are not. How Karen has raised, and she has adult kids, now you have young kids. How do you balance that? Choices are free, consequences are not. How do you maintain that? I can tell you what I want you to do, but I cannot choose for you.
I don't know. I just think back to myself, and when I was a teenager, I was very rebellious, and that was about the time my parents separated, and we kind of went away from the church. But having my own kids, I just felt the need to come back, and I don't know. I bet I was in my 20s when I don't know, when did we start going back to church? Something like that, in our 20s. And then seeing Justin get a stronger relationship as well he didn't have quite the upbringing that I did. So it's been kind of collaborating, I guess, for our kids, and I don't know.
Well, last question, and I just want to, number one, I want to thank everyone for, again, this is tough, to be willing to kind of put yourself out there and be vulnerable. I'd actually talked, I think, with Brianna about, let's just set a table up there, so it's kind of like the talk, the five.
Oh, the five. Oh, the view.
The view. The view.
Terrible.
But,
The table.
yeah, we talked
Stay
about
for the
that.
commercial.
But then we thought, you know what? Anyway, I don't know why the discussion came that said no. Anyway, but last question. Everybody has their own relationship with Christ. Everyone expresses it differently. Everybody, the idea that once you get saved, everybody's going to act the exact same way is just false.
Yeah.
So the last question is, how has being a mother changed? Choices are free, consequences are not. How has that changed your idea of, let me walk for the choices I make? How has being a mother changed your perspective on being a mother? I mean, on choices.
I've just wanted to set a better example for my kids, so, being here and being present and being up here today. Yeah.
Anyone else about how being a mom changed your perspective on choices?
Being a mom changed my perspective on everything. I think I know less now than when I started. I'm pretty sure.
I'm told that.
I don't think, I think I'm still learning every single day how to be a better mom and to have the right kind of influence. I still can't figure out how I can have 3 children, same parents, raised in the same household, and they are so different. A couple of mistakes I made initially is I thought I could treat them all the same. Boy, was I ever wrong. They don't all respond the same. And honestly, I didn't even like all of them. At different stages in their life when they were growing up, they were hard to be around. I went to a women's retreat, and Marcia Harger, bless her heart, says to me, she asked how things were going with the kids, and I'm like, oh. And she said, honey, when my kids were teenagers, if I walked across the living room floor and they could hear me breathing, it annoyed them. And I still think about that, because even when I thought I was doing it right, the feedback that came from my kids was not positive. It was just really, really hard. So it required being surrounded by other women who were doing the same jobs. And one of my best friends, I can remember, called me after she dropped her children off at school, the old car line, you get in and drop your kids off. And she said, she goes, I'm a terrible mom, I feel terrible. She said, because all the way to school, I'm screaming at my children. She said, we pull in car line, I'm trying to finish the lecture. Then I'm like, okay, love you, have a great day.
So true.
And the thing is that hearing other moms have that struggle encouraged me in my own walk.
Well, again, thank you guys so much for your willingness. I hope that what this has done is encourage you to know that, hey, some of the same problems I'm going through, they went through the exact same thing. And now they're on the other side, so there may be hope for me to come out on the other side. So I hope this has been encouraging for you. I hope if you guys were watching online, I hope this has been encouraging for you guys. I want, if you could, I'd like for all our mothers to stand. If you guys can stay right here. I'd like all our mothers